welcome to AWS On Air, and specifically another episode of Amster and the Brit's Code Corner. So I'm the Brit, Steve Roberts, the developer advocate for .NET and PowerShell at AWS, and with me is fellow host AM.
I thought I was the Brit.
Only an honorary Brit, and we'd have to change your cap.
So. Oh, that's right. I'm Amster, I suppose.
Amster, yes.
Or AM Grabelny, solutions architect here at AWS as well. And
we have
an on-air host. We've got a wonderful guest today.
We have an extra special guest today. We are joined by an actual engineer.
No, I can't live up to that.
We are joined by an actual engineer who writes code on a daily basis. So this is awesome. Welcome, Norm, my ex-colleague. Please introduce yourself to the viewers and tell them a little bit about what you do at AWS.
So name's Norm here. I have been working on the .NET side of AWS for the last 12 years now. Is that right, Steve? I think we've been around the moon a few times there.
A few months more than me. Yeah, we've been around the moon a few times. Yeah.
I don't know why the moon and not the sun. We'll just go with that one. Right. So been working on the SDK, done a lot of work to Visual Studio over the years inside. We've worked a lot on defining the Lambda experience for .NET. And the past year, we've been working on how can we kind of reimagine what deployment would look like for .NET applications. Like, how can we sort of simplify from the things that Steve and I first started years ago in Visual Studio with our wonderful wizards, and let's take a step back and what would things look like 12 years later?
So Norm, in addition to redefining astronomy and that the Earth now circles the moon, I'm super excited about that, number one.
I know.
Number two, I feel like you're one of the only people who's ever gotten me from a development standpoint, because I'm one of these weirdos, I'll call myself.
Oh, yeah, you are.
Yeah. I'm a .NET dev. I prefer Unix machines. I only use Visual Studio Code. And I work from the CLI primarily. Specifically, the .NET CLI tool is my preferred way of compiling, deploying, doing all kinds of stuff. You have always been the person.
I'm there for you, man.
Pushing all of these .NET extensions. It's amazing. I have to say thank you, just first of all.
Well, it's been definitely, it's been, obviously this isn't new anymore with .NET Core, right? This is our new world, but it's always been exciting when it came out. It's like, well, we really have a CLI tool chain, right? I mean, we had MS Build, but that was for that one engineer on the team who had dealt with the build infrastructure, right? Everyone else built the time Visual Studio, right? So, but that excitement of we actually have a real regular .NET tool chain, and it's like, how can we make sure AWS fits into that as well as possible? So
that's right. I'm
glad that you mentioned the CLI for one reason, which I'm going to come to, and I'm glad that you mentioned the wizards. So in this episode, we're going to focus on the CLI or command line experience for the new deployment tool, right?
Right.
And in the later one, we're going to go and look at the Visual Studio equivalent, which we showed very briefly in the Code Corner segment from Remars, if you haven't seen it, when we took a quick look at the toolkits. So before we pile into what this new CLI experience looks like, and this is why I'm glad you brought up the old wizards, is like, how does this differ? How does the new experience differ from the older experience? What makes it different? What makes it improved? How does it help people, and so on?
Well, I think we talked about for the CLI, when we wrote those wizards way back when, right? It was this is like, how can you quickly get your code from Visual Studio out into the cloud? And we were very, at the time, right? We just had Beanstalk, right? So it's like, how do we get you to Beanstalk, right? And then it expanded of like, okay, now we got Lambda, now we have ECS, and now we got Fire. So then it became how do we get you to service X, right? And that's really not the conversation I think we really want you to have when you're coming to AWS. It's, you have an application. How do I get my application to AWS? And that's like the bigger focus change. It's focusing not so much on the service that you're going to, but this is your application, and how do we get your application over there?
This is suited really for it's suited for everyone. Let's be clear, right?
That's the goal. I mean, obviously, there's more we can do. Right? I mean, we launched one, but yeah.
Right, but at least with this one, when I come to deploy my app, I only need minimal knowledge of AWS. Right. Is really where we're going at, right? With this, if you have the knowledge, great, it serves you well, right? But if you have minimal knowledge, you can get started really, really quickly. Is that right?
Yeah, but there was an important requirement we wanted to make. We wanted to make it so that, yeah, you could get your application like deployed in a couple clicks, and I didn't have to know what was an EC2 instance type or what's a key pair, all that stuff. Like you should be able to get clicked and out up there. But obviously, AWS is an extremely powerful platform, and we don't want to dumb it down, right? So we want to make sure, like, if once you know what you're doing, you know AWS, and you want to take advantage of those, none of that stuff should be hidden from you. So we want to make sure that you have access to all those powerful features as well. I think in the old world, I would say we kind of went more with like every bell and whistle came out as Beanstalk. Let's shove it into the wizard.
Yeah.
And it's a bit overwhelming. It's a 5-page wizard, I think.
Well, I think we actually went beyond 5 pages, didn't we? At one point, we were up at like 10 pages or something.
It was pretty big, right?
I remember the original wizard was maybe 4 or 5 pages, including the summary screen at the end that we wrote. That was like, what, 10 years ago now?
Yeah.
But I think at some point, I think we hit double-digit pages in that wizard if you went through the full path.
You're right.
You know, and yeah, it was overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think we wanted to like, how can we make sure we're talking not in AWS speak, but how in developer speak? Like, I have an application, get it over there, right? And then I will learn AWS as I'm going, and I'll take advantage more of it. Like that sort of is a major design goal with this.
I think too, Norm. I walk in multiple worlds. I'm not just a C# dev.
Why?
Immediately, you all are just going to boot me from this segment. I've written Java, I've written Python, I've written Node.js. But in particular, when working with C# and working in .NET, I think there's an expectation from developers as well for more of a guided, templated experience too. Does that come into practice when you all are designing the tools? The mindset of a typical .NET developer?
Definitely with a new experience. I think, like I said, the old experience, we were just like, let's expose everything. Let's just do it, right? But now it's sort of like, how can we get it as streamlined as possible? And not know, I mean, no one's going to say that AWS is the best at naming things, right? We all have interesting names for our stuff, right? So let's not have to decipher those names, and let's just figure out how you get your application up there in a way that makes sense there.
So how does that work? I mean, I have my application and I choose to deploy, but what data does it go off to suggest possible compute targets?
So we kind of recommend, or we call it recommendation engine inside of our tooling, which goes to look to see, like, is this a web project or is this a service role application? Okay. What NuGet packages do you have? Try to kind of figure out what you're doing with the application. Do you have a Docker file? That type of stuff. And then based off that, let's see, okay, based off what we determined here and what AWS services are, let's kind of give you, this is our ordered list. Like the top one's going to be our recommended. This is what we think you should do. Now, of course, everyone knows more than, and you might have a different opinion. So we're not going to say you only have to pick that one, but we're going to give you like, this is what we think is the most recommended thing based off what we see. If you like it, push enter and go, and you're ready to go, and it'll start deploying. Like it's not quite one click, but it's as close as we can get of like, just seeing it and let's click it. But of course, again, if you want to go dive deeper into it, all that's still exposed to you.
So you mentioned a Docker file there. I mean, if I'm somebody that's not yet adopted containers, will it not give me container options, or will it help me get to containerized services, even though I don't yet have a Docker file?
So yeah, if we don't see you have a Docker file, we're going to assume you're going for more of a classic deployment and list like Beanstalk or something like that. But again, we know containers are very popular. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to get them on there. Like there's a whole level of experience out there in the world with containers. And we want to help people try those out. So we will still suggest the container deployments. We'll still suggest you can go to Fargate or AppRunner. And if there's not a Docker file, we will then generate one for you based off your project structure for you. There are some project structures that are like, beyond the standards that we're not going to quite be able to figure out. But for the common project structures, we'll figure that out. We'll generate a Docker file. And you can deploy it. But again, like we would say, since you don't have a Docker file, that'll probably be a little further down the recommendation engine. But still available if you want to do it.
Okay. All right, cool.
What about non-human interactive ways of deploying, i.e., a CI/CD pipeline? Do the tools take into account, if I don't want to interactively take these steps?
Yeah, so I mean that was again sort of the driving. Like we started with the CLI experience, and the CLI experience is interactive, but it also gave us that engine that said, okay, we can also easily plug this into a GitHub action that just is going to go run all the commands directly, right? Because you can basically store all of your settings in a configuration file and then say, instead of doing the interactive mode, just use these settings and do everything that you want to do. So cool. And it makes it like, we're going to focus in the CLI experience here, but yeah, it makes it so you can do all that, right-click deployment in Visual Studio, but eventually you can take that what you just learned and everything in there and move it into the CLI and then figure out how to script your deployments in whatever is your pipeline. So.
Nice. Cool. All right. Well, this is Code Corner. So this could well be an appropriate time to go and look at some code, right?
All right.
All right. Let's do it.
So here you can see I have a brilliant career in web designing.
Your UX skills have not improved, Norm.
Right. I mean, that is a powerful text box and a button. So this is my English to Spanish translation. I think AM wanted to know where the library is at. So we can say, where is the library? And we can push the button and it will translate that. Oh, we are at a breakpoint because this is code, right? We're talking about code.
Oh. All right.
But yeah, we can see. ¿Dónde está la
biblioteca?
I'm not even going to try.
¿Dónde está la biblioteca?
There we go.
Thank you.
I gave a bit of an Italian accent on that one. But yeah,
that works. Yeah. So yeah, this is a very obviously simple application. It's using our AWS service to do translation. This is running it right now in Visual Studio. As you saw, I stopped at a breakpoint. But the question is how do we want to actually deploy this, right? And like I said, this is a super simple application, right? Versus you can see in our startup class, we are basically adding the translate service to our dependency injection system. And then in my controller, we can see we get that passed into us via the dependency injection. And again, it's just doing the simple call.
So this is doing a call to an AWS service using our AWS SDK for .NET, similar to what we showed in Code Corner from ReadMars, right? Those 2 sessions that we did there. But this is just doing it inside a web app running locally right now.
So very simple application. But again, we can show us like how do we deploy this? So since we're talking about the CLI, let's talk about the CLI. How do we do that? So let me switch over here.
I just want to say real quick too, Nord, this is going to sound super obvious, but I just want to state it out loud. This isn't even using a front-end framework or anything. This is full MVC, like Razor
full,
app.
Like, I was doing some serious hardcore front-end development there to build that.
Yeah, I saw the on-post code behind method there, so I was like, wait a minute, this is not, okay, this isn't React or Angular or anything.
We wouldn't waste time with those things, no.
Of course not.
Right, so here we are at CLI. So this is our CLI experience is a .NET tool, which means that we can acquire it via the .NET CLI. So I don't currently have it installed, but I can just do .NET tool install. I can make it a global install, and then our NuGet package is AWS deploy tools. I almost forgot the name. Stage fright. So that should pull that down. There we go. And that's the installation process, right? That's it. That's it.
Do I need anything else?
So the tool does use a couple other dependencies that are very common for developers to have. If it doesn't find it when it runs, it'll let you know and say where to download those. In particular, if you're doing a deployment that involves containers, it's going to say, hey, you need to have Docker installed, and this is where you're going to go. We are also using under the covers, we're using the CDK, our cloud development kit. It's sort of our infrastructure as code to do this deployment. And we use the .NET version of the CDK, but that still has a dependency on Node.js. So you do need to have that installed too. So it'll let you know if you don't have those.
So CDK and Node.js, and then Node.js because the CDK depends on Node.js.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm good. Okay. Oh, and Docker if I'm using containers, yeah.
What about credentials, Norm? In terms of credentials, does it respect the typical AWS profile locations?
Yep, it's going to use. I mean, we're obviously coming from the .NET team. We're using the .NET SDK, and it's using all the same fallback mechanisms for finding the credentials, as well as you can explicitly say, I want to use profile, foo, and region X, and all those things.
Okay.
In fact, so right now we could say .NET AWS, that's available, and we could say deploy. If we look at the help, you can see what I mean. Or you can see I can specify which profile I want, which region, sort of
familiar.
all the settings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have a few commands here, right? We have so there's obviously deploy, that's the main one. We could do list deployments and delete deployments. We have deployment projects, which we'll talk about in the next section.
Mm-hmm.
And server mode, which is really how we do the integrations with Visual Studio. This is a really tight coupling between the two tools. I mean, literally, the Visual Studio is starting up this tool in the background in this server mode and doing the communications back and forth. For the nerdy .NET people, we're actually using Signal R from the CLI to Visual Studio to do that communication that we'll see in the next one. So hold on to the next talk to see.
Hold on to that thought.
Signal R that's being used for more than just chat and app, more than just a chat app.
Love those WebSockets.
So, okay, so let's talk about doing a deployment here. Again, I don't know anything, but let's pretend we don't know anything about AWS. We found the doc, we knew how to type that in. So we can say .NET deploy. So here we go. We're looking up. It's found. I already have a default profile. I already have a region set up. So it's just using the regular SDK's logic for finding credentials if you didn't specify anything by default. I think I meant to delete number 1 to show you, but we'll just create a brand new one, right? But so this is going to list my existing deployments if I want to redeploy to one of those. But we can create a brand new one.
So is it showing 1 and 2 because you've already deployed this?
Yep. I was coming in prepared. This is me on the prepared phase.
Okay. So really we would be starting at 3. All right.
So here we'll say 3. And so here's where you can see where this is that recommendation engine kicked in, right? So in my case, I have a Docker file. So it says, your Docker file, your web application, let's go ahead and just point this to an ASP.NET Core at Fargate. If this was like maybe a message processing service application, right? It would say, well, let's deploy it as a service or as a scheduled task. But again, like we have App Runner still here. If you want to try App Runner. And there's Beanstalk as well, both Beanstalk for Linux or Windows. We're gonna stick with the default here and say we want to go to Fargate, right? Fargate on ECS. We'll create site number 1 here. Just choose the name. So, and now this is like loading up. Okay, these are the settings that we could use. And in theory, if I could just push enter and it would start the deployment right now, right? And that's all you'd have to do. But we have a lot of settings we could do. Like in my case, I'm needing to use the translate service. So I don't want it to create a role. I want to actually use a role I've already specified. So I'm going to say, change the application role to my ECS demo one. So
so I don't have to go through all of the individual settings pages. I can just jump straight into just the ones I want to change. From the CLI. Okay.
And there's much more, like if I say more, because again, this goes back to our conversation of let's not overwhelm you with every option. This is the most common one, but I could say more to get advanced and you can start seeing. I could turn auto scaling on, load balancing, what are all the health checks, add special Docker arguments, all those other things, as well as configuring the Fargate stuff. So, our case here, all I really needed to do was go to set the IAM role.
All right.
I'm going to actually change just to go slightly off script. No, we'll just do it. Never mind. Push enter. So we're going to kick off deployment.
All right.
And so here you can see now it is building the Docker image.
Running Docker.
So you can see you aren't having to deal with Docker at all. It's going to take care of doing the Docker builds. Once it's done, it's going to actually log on to ECR, push the image up, and then kick off all of the deployments. So here's the actual pushing of the image going on. It's going very quick. And so, yeah, after this stage, we're going to get to where we use the CDK for deployment. So we use the CDK, but again, we don't want to like make you have to do a lot of things to get started. You don't have to care about it. This can just be an artifact of what we use. When in the next section, next time, we'll talk about how you could customize the CDK project. But from our point of view right now, basically, we're using that as, we're generating a project, matching our settings. We're going to deploy that, and then it's just going to disappear from you. It's just a side effect. Now, this will take a little while to run.
Yeah, we're getting close to time, so I think we've done the traditional cooking show, right? We've got one that's pre-deployed.
Yep. So here we go. You can see this is that same. We've configured the project. We've deployed it. It's going to get all the status here, and eventually at the end, we're going to get like, this is the cluster that we just created, our service, and here is our, oops, it went to the wrong window, of course. But here we can see we deployed it out to AWS.
Cool.
Now, the last thing I want to try to squeeze in here.
Squeeze away.
Squeeze away. Because I want to make sure, like, we have this very interactive experience for doing the deployment, but you also probably want to script this out, put this in a pipeline or something like that.
Yeah.
So you can also, like if not more, you'd think I'd know what to do, right? So we can actually save all those settings that we want to do into a file. So this is going to say, I want to use, this is our application, this is our recipe, all those settings that we want to do. And then we can just tell the deploy tool to use that. So we can say .NET AWS deploy and apply that file and say silent to make, don't prompt me for anything, right? Because you don't want your pipeline. So I can just do that. And that'll kick off that same deployment. But now we're not going to get prompted for anything. It's just going to show you all the settings, but it's doing all that exact same thing.
Would you just recommend people put that settings file right in version control alongside the project?
I mean, again, it's somewhere else. It depends on, again, how you want to manage. I mean, obviously these recipes here I've got one simple file, but obviously I might say, here's the file I want to use for the beta environment, another one for prod environment, depending on how you want to control those. So I don't want to necessarily prescribe how you do it.
Fair enough.
Definitely you can have multiple files to define all of the different stages of your environments.
Okay.
Do that.
Well, this is definitely a simpler UX than the multitude of wizards that we had and the different tools. So this is great. This is awesome to see. We are at time, so we are going to finish here on the command line experience, but we're going to be right back on AWS on Air, and later on we're going to have another code corner with Norm to take a look at the Visual Studio side of the experience. So stick with us and we'll be right back. See you later.
Bye.